Let me share with you something from Catholic.com. And this is very much right down the line for what my dad believes, and very much in line with what you will find in most Catholic doctrines. And I quote, Catholics agree with Protestants that Scripture is a standard of truth, and they have that in quote marks within their writing, even the preeminent one. In other words, Scripture is even the preeminent standard of truth, but not in a sense that rules out the binding authority of apostolic tradition and the church. Let that sink in for just a moment. In other words, something that they view as apostolic tradition can be bound on the same level with Scripture. Now, it doesn't even have to go back that far, to be honest with you. I've studied with enough Catholics, I've studied with enough priests that tradition may only go back 300 or 400 years, and then that is seen as binding. Tradition may go back less than that and is seen as a binding tradition of the church. All right? Also, the idea that the church, this would be the idea that of popedom, that the Pope has supreme authority in the church to act on God's behalf. I want you to notice a couple of things in here. That binding of tradition and belief in the authority of the church. That those both overrule what we know of as the Bible. So follow this thinking through for just a moment. If the church authorized or canonized the Bible, then the church would certainly have every right to alter or overrule, because the authority did not exist in the writings. The authority existed by the authority of the church, that the authority of the church gave to the authors at the time to write those, and not in the Bible itself. So the church would have the final authority and not the Word as we have it today. We find and this is another quote from Catholic.com, we find the substantive first applied to the sacred scriptures in the 4th century by Saint Athanasius for its directive, the Council of Laodicea of the same period. This is a quote from Catholic.com. So the claim, if you Google, when did the Catholics first canonize the Bible, it will direct you to this link. And it will direct you to what they say, that the Bible was first canonized by a bishop by the name of Athanasius, who is, by the way, was a real live person. He's long dead now. Bishop Athanasius was in the habit of writing what he referred to as festive letters. And in the 4th century, so we're talking 300 some odd AD. I think I had a note on this. I think it's 356 AD that Athanasius wrote this festival letter. And in it, he named what we know of as the books of the New Testament, okay? Catholics also claim that there was a council in Laodicea about the same time period that canonized these books. Okay. So that's the claim that is made. That's what my dad believes. Now the problem is this. The problem and what has plagued the Catholic Church, what led to the Reformation movement of the late 1400s, early 1500s, and carried on through into the modern era, is this: that the church for centuries, if the church has final authority, rules change based on who is the Pope, who's in control of the Catholic Church, and what is going on in the world today. Okay? We see that. We see a progression, a change within the church. That's really what led to the famous Reformation period, is that people realized that in their lifetime, rules in the church were changing. They didn't understand why. So their desire was to understand why. That led them to delve into the scriptures, which is a side note, and we'll get into this later on. As a side note, during this time period, what we know of as the Dark Ages was a very dark time period for the church, in which the scriptures, it was discouraged to read the scriptures for fear that the Reformation might actually occur. We would also be led to believe that there are a number of extra writings, okay? Don has mentioned this before. What about the extra writings? It's part of his questionnaire on where we got the Bible. And it's a perfect, legitimate question. What I did not realize until I started working on this particular study is that since 2019, actually really since 2020, the last 3 or 4 years, as people have kind of shifted in their beliefs due to COVID-19, a large amount of interest has been created in these extra writings. I was kind of unaware of it, but the more I looked into the history of the Bible, the more the extra writings began cropping up. Okay? Now, these extra writings, and I use that in quotation marks, they are not in our Bibles of today, and they were never, if you will, canonized even by the Catholic Church. These would include the Gospel of Thomas, is probably the best known of the extra writings, okay? I believe there's also a Gospel of Peter. There's some other things out there. I've seen for years, hang on, it's hanging here in the back of my mind. The Book of Enoch is one that is in this category. Okay, now I'll just make a quick note right here. On the Gospel of Thomas, we have a huge amount of evidence. There are only 3 manuscripts of the Gospel of Thomas in existence. One of those was discovered in Egypt about 1945. That was actually the second one. The first one, we had only a very small scraps of it and didn't realize what it was until Muhammad Ali, not the boxer, but Muhammad Ali of Egypt discovered the Gospel of Thomas in a clay jar that was sealed in 1945, I believe. Now, we know from outside historical documents, not from the Gospel of Thomas itself, but from outside historical documents, that the Gospel of Thomas was written sometime around the end of the 2nd century. So almost 200 years after the other Gospels were written. We do not know who wrote the Gospel of Thomas. Okay? We know that it was not the Apostle Thomas. He died, well over a century before. But honestly, this is nothing new. If you want to publish a book and you want it to be well known, you would give it a name that would be attractive, correct? So we'll get into those other writings later. And we'll get into the reason that even Christians of the day, when they were written, largely rejected those writings. But Catholic Bibles, in case you're wondering, include what we know of as the Apocrypha. And again, I've gone over a small list of those books. They're not included in our Bibles, although what most people don't know is that they were included in the King James Version Bible until the mid-1800s, okay? And they were removed by Bible printers about 1880 something altogether, and are no longer even available in the King James versions. Again, we'll get into that at a later date maybe.